Hey, what's up everyone? So I'm back with another video on authentication with Django and React using JSON Web Tokens. And in this video, I want to use Axios Interceptors to update our refresh tokens. So in the last video, we built out a full project with Django on the back end and React on the front end. And we used a different method to update those refresh tokens. So what we did is we went through that entire process of configuring everything where we have a login, log out functionality, and also refresh token functionality. But the method we used in that video was to refresh our token periodically every 5 to 15 minutes. And that's how our access token always stayed up to date. Now, there's different ways about doing this, or different ways we can go about doing this. And the method that I wanted to show you this time was to use Axios instead of fetch. And we're going to use Axios interceptors to actually update this. So if you don't know what those interceptors are, they're kind of like middleware where we can actually trigger a function before every request and after every request. So instead of updating a token periodically, what we're going to do is simply fire off a request. And before that request is sent, we're going to have a function that checks the lifespan of that token. If there's something wrong with that token, whether it's corrupted or there's maybe an expiration date that's passed on that token, we're going to call a request to the backend to use our refresh token to simply update that access token. And then we'll let the original request fire off. So that way, no request ever fails. Now, that's one way of doing things. And I've seen a lot of people use the other way where they go on the response cycle. So basically, a request is made. So let's actually look at this picture here. So this is how I've seen a lot of people do things. They'll send a request. If that token is expired, they'll get a bad request. They'll request a new token. Then they'll persist on that original request. So there'll be a fail in the backend, but the user won't really see what's going on unless they're looking through their network tab. And that request will look like it just went through and everything was updated kind of in the background. Now, I like this method. I think it works and I see a lot of people use it, but what I don't understand is why don't we just update the token in the front end? So if you see an issue with this, let me know. I'm actually curious myself. I figured we can simply just check the token before it's sent and update it so that way we never even have a failed network call. Now, we're going to use Axios in this video, but I'm going to follow up with one other video and we're going to basically build our own interceptor around the fetch API. So that way, because fetch doesn't actually have these interceptors, so we're going to make it customized and we can do the same thing with fetch here. So let's go ahead and recap where we were at in the last video and then we'll continue. So I'll close this out here. And this is the Axios documentation. So I'd highly recommend you go through this. I'm going to assume you already know Django and React. And if you want to go ahead and set up the entire project, I would highly recommend you check out the last video. But if you don't want to see that, we could just go ahead and download the GitHub repo, follow the installation guide, make sure you have Django set up and React, and just make sure you can be up to date before you get started here. So this is the GitHub repo. This will be linked in the video description. This is the project at this point. So what we have right now is this login and log out functionality. The tokens are being stored in local storage. I'm going to leave that up to you wherever you want to store that. That's not the point of this video. And right now, if we go to the backend, our tokens are expiring every 5 minutes. So we can set this in the settings.py file in our backend file here. So in the Django project. So we can set this to maybe 2 minutes here. I'll update it in a minute. And that way we can actually see that request fail and update. So this is the backend here. We won't go over all the code here. We have our API. That's all covered in the last video. You can check out the source code here. So let's see, in the backend folder, our API is inside of this base folder. So let's go to the front end here. And we are using the context API to manage state here. So that's how we log a user in. Again, that token is being stored inside of local storage. We have this auth context. So we have the context here. We create the context. We create this provider. We have all of our tokens, which we get the token on the initial login. We set our user and we also have this loading method. So if we log a user in, we're using fetch right here to log a user in, which will update this in a minute. Then we have our logout functionality. I want to make sure I'm not blocking the screen here. So I'll move my face over a little bit. And we also have this update token method. So this is how the user was persisting before. So we have this update token method. It simply makes a call to this backend or the endpoint, which is API/token refresh. And this endpoint takes in a refresh token. So we would send that right here. And that's how we would update it. So we'll just go ahead and update everything, update local storage, update our state, or if that token failed, we would log a user out. Now, this update token method was called on the first load, so that's how we would make sure that we always have a fresh token. And we would also call this periodically every 4 minutes. So we would call set interval, and we would just call this every 4 minutes. But the problem with this method is that we would actually need to know what someone on the backend had set this value to. So in settings.py, if somebody changed this value to like 10 minutes, let's say, or maybe even a shorter time, let's say they updated this to 1 minute. Now the person on the front end would have to know about this, and then they would have to update that periodic update inside of our context method here. So we'll go back to the front end here, and inside of auth context, we would have to change these values. So this is auth context, so I'll just scroll through all the way. We use the JSON or JWT decode method. We use history to reroute our user. So we have login, logout, update token, and we have this use effect. And we provide everything here, and we're also waiting for loading to be set to false before we render everything out. Now, inside of our components, we have a header component. It uses the auth context to render out the user name. We have this functionality to log a user out or log a user in and render the username. So we'll go down to pages here. So we also have a private route. So this is actually how we're making sure that only logged in users can view certain pages. We created a private route which looks at the user object from auth context. And if the user's logged in, we make sure they can continue. If they're not, we'll redirect them to the login page. So that's our private route. Now inside of pages, we have a home page here, and the home page simply calls get notes. This is the user's notes. We use the user's auth token. We make a request here to this endpoint, and this is where we send that access token. So this is how we have permission to get that user. If something goes wrong, we log a user out. When everything's updated, we set the notes here and we render this out. Now, the login page is a simple form here. There's different ways you can log a user in. At this point, we are not having any state here. There's one method where you can actually set the password and username in the state. We're not going to worry about that because that's not the purpose of the video. I would recommend using that method. All we're doing is getting these values in auth context from our event here. So when a user is logged in, we take the e.target.username and the password value and we submit that. Okay, so I just want to make sure you're caught up on everything. Inside of app.js, we have our provider. We wrap that around all the items that we want that data in. We have our standard route using React Router DOM and our private route. So let's go ahead and start customizing it from here. So what I want to do is actually go into our auth context. This is where we're going to get started. So we'll go into our auth context here. So that's inside of context, auth context.js. And the first thing I'm going to do here is actually get rid of our set interval method here. So we don't need this update token method anymore. So I'm just going to go ahead and comment that out. Let's just do that so we don't actually get rid of it. That way you can look through it if you want to see the original method, even though the code is available. Let's close that out there. So I comment this out, and I also want to get rid of this method here. So we'll go ahead and remove all of this. We'll get rid of this interval here, so we'll remove that. And now useEffect is cleared out. So inside of useEffect, all I want to do is check if we have an auth token. Once that token is ready, then we'll go ahead and set loading to false, and we'll let everything else proceed here. So we'll just go ahead and set auth tokens, which is the state here inside of our auth provider. We get the tokens, and down here we can go ahead and just set that. So we're going to go ahead and check if there's any tokens. If there is, just in case, we're going to use jwt.decode. So jwt decode, and I believe that's how I have it imported. And what this is going to do is simply decode my token. We talked about this in the last video. It's going to take that token and it'll actually get the value. So things like our username, the user's ID, and so on. So we'll use jwt decode. We'll do auth tokens.access. We'll set that value, and we'll just go ahead and call set user, and we'll just wrap that. So we'll make sure that a user on the first load is set and everything's good to go. And we'll just do set loading to false. And then that's going to allow everything else just to continue. So we'll save all of this, and let's go ahead and make a few installs here. So we'll go ahead and open up a new terminal. Make sure you are CD'd into the front end folder depending on how you downloaded that from the GitHub repo. So we'll just do cd front end, and let's just clear that, and we'll just do npm install Axios. This is one of the reasons why I don't like Axios. It's not a big issue, but I don't like installing something separate, but it does have some cool features. So that's why I really want to show this with Fetch, because that's my personal preference. So we'll install Axios, and we'll also install day.js here. So we'll just do npm install day.js, and it's another alternative to moment.js. So basically it allows us to take like a timestamp, and this is what we're going to use to actually compare the timestamp of our token when it's decoded to the current time that we're at. So it's going to take a snapshot of where we're at and the expiration date, and it's going to see if we're over that. So I'm going to make sure my server is still on. That's already imported, so I still have my backend and front end servers on. Make sure those are on, and let's continue from here. So once those are set up, what I'm going to do is actually create my own instance of Axios, so that way I can add those interceptors only in a single instance, and I can use Axios on its own. If you're not familiar with what that is, I'd highly recommend going through this documentation and looking this up. So there's the Axios instances. So if you go to Axios right here, there's Axios instance. Basically, you can use Axios on its own. You can use something like axios.post.get and get those methods, or use those methods. Or you could create an Axios instance. In this case, we create an instance, and then we can add an interceptor to that specific instance for private routes or whatever we want to do. So I'll just leave that documentation open for now, and let's just go ahead and continue here. So we'll set this up here. And for this instance, I'm going to add this to my utils.py file. So basically my utility functions, and let's see, I want to call this Axios instance. So we'll use this instance to make those requests to the private routes instead of just using Axios on its own. So let's go ahead and set this up. So now that we have Axios imported, I want to go ahead and set this, or actually make those imports and then continue with this. So we'll import Axios from Axios. And I use a shortcut. I talked about this in the last video. It's called React code snippets, I believe, or RX7 code snippets. I forgot the name. I talk about this, but basically I can type in IMP and it's going to give me that shortcut. So let me just pull that up because a lot of people ask me about that. It's React or RX7, I believe, if I can remember that. Or ES7 code snippets. That's what it was. So EX7 or ES7 code snippets. So this is the package for this. So that's how I'm making those imports here. Sorry about the little side tangent. So we'll also go ahead and go into auth context, and I want to install or get this JWT decode method. So we'll get that going, and we'll also import day.js. So import day.js, and then that's coming from day.js. Okay, so just a little prep work here. And I also want to set a base URL. So we'll just set this value. We're going to call this base URL. And this will just be port 8000 here. So we're just going to go ahead and open up port 8000. This is the endpoints. Don't worry about this error. It's not broken. My endpoints go into API like that. And this is where we have those endpoints. So I'm going to take this value, and we'll just go ahead and set this as the base URL here. So I'm actually going to take that part out. So I actually want to type in the API / and whatever that route was. So the first thing I want to do is get my token. So this is going to be inside of that Axios request. On every request, I want to make sure I have the latest token. So I'm just going to take this value right here, and I'll recap what's going on here. And I'm going a little bit faster because this was all covered in the last video, which will be linked up in the video description. So we'll set this value of auth tokens. And this will be set to local storage. So the first thing is we're going to check if we have anything inside of local storage. So it's going into, sorry about that, jumping around. It keeps changing for me. So we first check if we have a token. If we have a token, we're going to use json.parse, and we're going into local storage, and we're getting that token, and we're just going to parse it. So we're getting that token because it's a string value inside of local storage. If we don't have one, then auth tokens is going to be null. So we just check that value. Now what I want to do is go ahead and just create an Axios instance. So we'll set const. We'll call this Axios instance. So we'll set this value. This will be set to Axios.create. So we're creating our own instance here. And we're just going to go ahead and pass in some data here. So what I want to do here is first set the base URL. So we're just going to do base URL. We'll set that value. We don't need a key value pair if we just set it directly like this. And I also want to make sure that every single request has a token attached to it inside of the headers. So let's go ahead and set the headers object. So we'll do headers, and we'll just go ahead and set authorization. So we'll do authorization, that's with a capital A. So let's set that value. We want to go ahead and make this a key value pair. We'll use the backtick, so template literals. And in the back end, I set this as bear. We did this in the last video. That was actually the default. So it's an access token. We'll create some space here, and we'll just go ahead and pass in a variable, and we'll get this auth token right here, and we want to get the access token. So all we did was create an instance, and we just set some pre-configured information here on every single request. So in this case, this is going to be a request to a private route, so we always have a token. It doesn't mean we always have to send this, but this is an option, so I'm going to use this for those private routes. So before we add in our interceptors, this is all I wanted to do. I wanted to configure this. I want to use it, show you how to use that just in case you're newer to Axios, and then we'll add in those interceptors. So let's go to our homepage. This is where we're actually using this. So we'll go to the homepage here, and I want to make this import. So we'll just go ahead and import this. This is from our utils file. So it's 2 folders back, or 1 folder back from pages. It's inside of utils, and we're just going to get the Axios instance. So we'll just do utils. We'll go into Axios instance, and we'll just bring this in. So that'll be the import. And we just want to change this request right here. So at this point, we have get notes, and we're using fetch here. So we're going to go ahead and comment all of this out, and I'll remove it in a second. We'll go ahead and set the response to await. And we're going to use Axios instance, and we can pass in the method. So this will be a get method, and we set the base URL to port 8000. So now all I need to do is take this part of that request right here, pass in the quotes, and we'll just do /API/notes. So this will make that request. So we just need to change that right there, fix it, and then we'll get our response. So inside of response, it's a little bit different from fetch. We don't need to parse that, so we can remove data. And in this case, with the response, we actually have a value called response.data. So that will give us that data right there. So we'll get the response data. I'm not sure what the status text looks like, so we'll actually comment that out, or we'll actually console that out and make sure that it's also unauthorized, or if it's different, we'll fix that, because we also want to log a user out if this request fails. You know what? Actually, at this point, we don't need to do this, so I can actually get rid of that, because this is going to be inside of this request, and it can all be added inside of that call right there. So let's save that. Let's also get rid of all of this right here, and let's take a look at what we have right now. So at this point, we're using the Axios instance, and we're making the API call from this right here. So we're actually going to run into a little issue here, and I want to show it to you before you actually run into that. At this point, if I refresh it, it looks like the call is working and everything checks out. So if I actually go to inspect element, what's happening here is on the first load of our website, if we go in here, we have our token right here. So on initialization, this call right here inside of Axios instance right here gets loaded right here, and we have a token. Now, if I happen to log out and manually refresh it, we don't have a token right now. So we actually run into this first issue, and that's because access right here actually does not exist. So let's throw in a question mark right there. So we'll make sure it doesn't throw an error on this point. So we'll save that right there. If I refresh it, everything looks good. So we have no token. But if I log in, we have our token right here, but this never actually gets updated right here. So auth token never gets updated. So we try to make this call, and then that call fails. And if you look at the console, it tells us right here, and we don't see our notes. So this is where I actually want to use interceptors to start with and actually make sure that this gets fixed. So if we go into this website, axios-http.com, let's check out the interceptors right here. We'll go back here, and I just want to find those. Where are they hiding? Okay, interceptors. Okay, so here are the interceptors. We can use a interceptor on the request. So this actually lets us do something before that request processes, and then the interceptor on the response. So let's go ahead and actually create the interceptor on request. And what I want to do here before I continue with anything is I want to refresh this token right here. Now, this isn't going to be the way that I'm going to do this long term, because I actually want to create my own React hook, but I'm trying to get the point across, and then we'll update it. So we'll go down here after our Axios instance right here. So after this method, and let's go ahead and actually create the interceptor. So we can go into axios.interceptors.request, and then we'll throw in use. But in this case, we want to add the interceptor only to this instance of Axios. We don't want to add it to the global object. So let's go ahead and set this. So we'll do Axios instance.interceptors.request. So that means we're adding it to the request. So it's going to get called before the request is made. We'll create an async function right here. We'll go ahead and get the request object, and we'll finish up the function here. So after the request is made, we want to go ahead and return the function. So we'll just do return, and we'll return the request. So let's quickly just console something out. So we'll just say console.log, and we'll say interceptor ran. Don't worry about the spelling. If it's misspelled, we're not going to worry about that. I guess I'll just copy and paste that. So the interceptor ran. So we're still going to get a fail. But at this point, let's go ahead and look at this. So we see that the interceptor ran. If I log in, we're still going to get the error. So the error went away because I manually refreshed it and then got that token. But at this point, we see the interceptor ran before that call was made. So this is where we can update it. So before it finishes that request, we want to update this. So what I want to do is actually get this auth token variable. We'll take this entire thing. And again, this isn't the most efficient way. I don't want to check local storage on every request, but let's just go ahead and update this. So we'll get rid of let right here. And before that request is made, we want to get the tokens right here. And let's go ahead and actually generate. Actually, at this point, we could just set our header. So we'll go into request, and then we'll go into .headers.authorization, and we'll just update it. I think this way will work right here. We'll just take the bear token, and we'll set that. So we'll just go ahead and take this value right here, and let's just set it. So let's just paste that in right here. And I need to set the equals symbol. Okay, so on request, just in case if we don't have it, we're going to go ahead and get that value. In fact, I can even just do if auth tokens doesn't exist. So if not auth tokens, let's go ahead and call this. Okay, so that's going to be the first check, and we're going to see how this interceptor is going to run and how it's going to fix it. So if I go ahead and log out, we'll refresh it. We'll make sure that we have no token right here. There's no token. If I log in, the interceptor runs, it updates that on the request, and then it sends it. So what I want to do now is actually check the token expiration here. So at this point, all we're doing is just making sure that we have a token somewhere in there, but the token will expire at some point, the access token and the refresh token, both of those. So let's go ahead and actually go into the backend. And what I want to do is set this expiration to 5 seconds, or maybe we'll just do 2 seconds. We'll just make sure it happens quick, or 3 seconds. So we'll save that, and we're going to generate a new token that's about to fail. So let's go ahead and actually check this out. So we'll log out. We're going to get ourselves a new token that expires really fast. We'll make sure we refresh it. Let's go ahead and load it. We'll wait 1, 2, 3, and let's try to refresh that. So what's happening here is the access token was updated, but now that we sent it, that token is expired and it's failing this call. So this is what we want to fix. So we'll go back in here. We'll close out settings.py for now. And inside of Axios instance, I can close out the home page. Let's go ahead and check this out. So we're going to use day.js and JWT decode to get the token. And then we're simply going to decode it. We're going to get the expiration time, and we're going to compare it to our current timestamp. So if I actually go into one of these tokens, let's get this access token. We'll scroll all the way to the right here. And let's just pull up jwt.io. So if I decode this token, this is how I can actually do it manually. So that's what JWT decode will do for me. If I paste that token in here inside of the encoded token, it's going to decode it. I have all this information about it, and I have this expiration time. So when you're comparing it, make sure you know what this value is. Decode one of your tokens and see this Unix timestamp. So this is what we're going to compare it against. So we'll go back in here, and we'll continue from this point on. So down here, let's first get our user. So we'll just do const user, and that's going to be set to JWT decode. That's how I imported it. And we're just going to throw in the token. So we'll just do auth tokens.access. So we're just going to decode that access token. And now we want to set a value called is expired. So Is expired is going to use day.js here. And what we're going to do is simply throw in the expiration date against today's date. So we'll throw in day.js, we'll do Unix. Don't worry about the details. I'd recommend looking up day.js documentation. They have all these different values. All I'm going to do is basically run a comparison with a greater symbol to, or a greater symbol that's going to basically set this value to where if we're over the value of 1, that means the token is over a certain number. So we're just running a calculation. Day.js will take care of this. So we're taking day.js, not days, and we're just going to go ahead and set Unix, and we're going to throw in the expiration date. So we'll do user.expiration, that's exp, that's what it looked like in the decoded token. And then we have this value called diff. So this is going to give us the difference here. And the difference here, we want to value this, or we want to check this against the current day. So we're throwing in the current day against the expiration date. And if this value is greater than 1, this value is going to be set to true. So that means we are expired. So after this, we want to go ahead and check a condition. We'll just do if not is expired. Then let's go ahead and return the original request. So let's try this. So I'll just console this out. We'll check this, make sure it's working. Sorry about my explanation to day.js. Look up the documentation. This is one of the ways that I found to run this here, or to run this. So we'll throw this in. We'll just do is expired, throw in the string value, and let's check this out. So the token's going to expire pretty quick. So we'll log out really quick. We'll log in, check the console. Let's refresh everything. We'll log in, is expired is false. We'll wait 1, 2, 3, and now the token should be expired. We set it to 3 seconds. Now is expired is true. So if is expired is true, then we want to continue. So if it's not true, if it's false, we stop right here. We don't run anything else. We return this request. If this is true, if our token is expired, what we want to do is make a request. We'll just do response, and we're going to set this value to await. And we're not going to use the Axios instance because this would actually throw us into an infinite loop. We want to use the global Axios object. So we're going to do await axios.post. We're sending a post request. And at this point, if you follow the last tutorial, you know our endpoint is the base URL. So we need to throw in the dollar symbol. We'll do base URL. And then we're just going to go ahead and throw in /API/token/refresh. So we need to send a refresh token to this value, and we'll get back a new access and a new refresh token. So now we want to send in some parameters here, and in here we'll just do refresh. So that's how we have to send that value, and we'll just get the auth tokens, and we'll just throw in refresh. Now, there are other error handling methods that we might need to throw in here depending on what you have in your application, but that's going to be completely dependent up to you, whether you have a different style of tokens or what you want to do with that. That's completely up to you. At this point, we're just going to handle the basic fails of a token not existing and expiring. So we're getting a new token. So we send that call right here. We go to our port 8000 API/token refresh. We send a refresh token, so the key and then the value. And what we want to do is get back this response. So we'll just do local storage dot set item. And we're just going to go ahead and set auth tokens. So that was the value that we set originally on the website. And then we're just going to go ahead and do json.stringify. So it's a key value pair. We need to stringify that token. And at this point, we're just going to do response.data. Let's see. So I guess we could just do response.data. So once this is set, let's go ahead and just get these request headers again. We'll take this and we're just going to go ahead and update the headers with a new token before it continues. So we'll recap what happened in a second. So let's go ahead and get the response.data.access, and that's what we're going to set to the headers. So just make sure that you don't get these mixed up. So this one's getting it from auth tokens and this one's getting it from access. So let's recap this again. So we check if we have a token just in case. If we don't, we quickly try to get it from local storage and we add it to the headers. Then we get the user. We check if that user token is expired. If that token is not expired, we continue with the request and everything's fine. If that token is expired, however, we get a new token with our refresh token. We take that refresh token, we send that to the backend. Once we get the new tokens, we update it so we get a new refresh token and a new access token. We update the headers with the newest token to ensure they're not expired, and then we return the request. So let's go ahead and refresh this and let's check this out. So if I go into the console here, if I refresh it, it looks like even after it expires, we're still doing good here. So we'll wait 1, 2, 3, we'll refresh that, and that looks like it's working. So let's actually check this out. So let's open up our terminal and let's look into the backend. So this is the Django server, and you can see where we're getting GET request and POST request. So if I actually just open up this website and keep refreshing it, we're gonna see a GET request, and then after 3 seconds, you're gonna see that POST request appear right here. So that means we never update our token until it expires. So we'll wait for the POST request, and then we'll count 1, 2, 3, and then you see a POST request, and there we go. So that's all we needed to do. Now we do have a few issues we want to fix here. So at this point, we're using React here, and it's going to change depending on what framework or what you're using in the front end. But we're just creating our own Axios instance, and we kind of run into this issue. So we were able to fix this with this request right here. We just check if we need to update it, and then we just go ahead and update that. But the problem here is once this token is expired, I also want to update my state. Everything that's inside of the context, whether I'm using the context API or Redux, it's going to change depending on what's going on. And there is actually no way to update our state from here. So we want to go ahead and use our own custom React hook. We're going to create one. And then inside of the React hook, we're going to do pretty much the same exact thing here. But in that case, we're actually going to be able to get the context API, kind of like what we do inside of our home component. So let's go back here. We'll go into components. Let's just check the header. So you see how we can use the context and then we can actually get this information. Well, we want to be able to get that information and then actually update it. So it's going to make our code a little bit cleaner, at least the React way. So let's go ahead and fix this. So I'm actually going to leave Axios instance for you. I just want to make sure you can see both versions of this, just in case, depending on what you're trying to do. And inside of utils, let's create a new file here. So we'll just call this use, and then we'll just do Axios. So with React hooks, they're just functions, but the method here is to always use the keyword use. That makes it a React hook. If you don't use the word use, that won't work. So let's just set up a few things here. So we're just going to make some imports. So we want to take in JWT decode. We also want to import Axios. So let's do that. We'll import Axios from Axios. We also want day.js. I guess I could just copy all of this. And let's go ahead and actually import the auth context here too. So we'll just go ahead and import from React. So we'll do a destructured import from React, and we'll just do use context. So literally the only thing that's going to be different here is the fact that we can update the state, and this is going to be a hooked. So we'll do use context here, and let's go ahead and set our base URL. So I'm actually going to copy a lot of stuff here. So we'll close out the context file just to not confuse things here. And I really hope my face didn't cover up what I was doing earlier. I'll try to rewatch the video and see. I just realized that my code is getting awfully close to this area. Okay, so we'll take the base URL. Let's go ahead and paste that in right here. Let's create our hook. So for our hook, we'll just do const, and we're going to call this useAxios. So it has to start with that keyword. We'll create the arrow function, and let's go ahead and return Axios instance. Okay, so we're going to create all this in a second, and then we also want to export default. So we'll do export default, and we're going to export useAxios. Okay, so we have all this ready. We have our hook here, and let's start building this out. So inside of useAxios, I want to get my context or the data. So we'll just do const, and we'll go into the context API. I want to get tokens, and then I want to get set user. So we want to update the user once everything is updated, and we'll do set auth tokens. Okay, so this is all coming from the context API right here. So we're just getting these values that are exported right here through context data that go into our providers. So that's what we're working with. So we're getting that information, and we're getting those values, and we'll just do use context, and we want to use the auth context. So we'll do auth context. And that should auto import. I'm surprised it's not doing that. So let's go ahead and bring that in. So we'll just import auth context. So we'll go into context / auth context. I'm not sure why it didn't import. It looks like it should have, but we have use context. We get these values from it. Once we set this up, let's go ahead and actually go into Axios instance. Let's take this value. So now we'll take Axios instance. We'll bring that in right before the return method. So we'll take Axios instance, and let's go ahead and actually set the headers here. So how are we setting these? So at this point, we got the auth tokens from local storage. Here we can just go ahead and get that from auth tokens here, so we don't need to get our local storage. So that's one advantage here. We just got the context, and we can set that value right there. So we set our headers, and let's go ahead and throw in our interceptor. So I'm just gonna paste in this entire interceptor, and we're just gonna customize a few things here. So this is gonna be after Axios instance, so go ahead and put that underneath it. And at this point, we don't need to check our auth tokens. So let's go ahead and just get rid of all of that. So that's gonna be from our local storage, so we don't need to check that. Then if we go down here, we have our user. So we're gonna check if the user's expired. We get the request, everything looks good here, local storage. The only difference here is just gonna be that after we set local storage, we also want to update our context API. So we wanna use set user. So let's go ahead and throw this in here. So we'll do set user, we'll throw in response.data. That's gonna be our user. And let's go ahead and actually that's gonna be set auth tokens. So set auth tokens. I thought that looked weird. And then we wanna go ahead and set the user. So the user is gonna be JWT decode, and we're gonna do response.data.access. Okay, so that should be it. This is our custom hook. Let's repeat it. So we imported use context. We went ahead and imported, we don't need that inside of useAxios. I don't know what that imported. We imported the context itself. We set the base URL. We created our hook, our function. We exported it. And then we did the same exact thing, except for at this point, we get our state. We set the value of our token from the state now. And all we do different here is we removed that first check and we updated the state once this is done. So now we want to go ahead and actually use this. So let's go ahead and go back to the home page. And now we want to use the hook instead of the Axios instance. So pages, home pages, let's go ahead and import this. So I don't need Axios instance anymore. So we'll just import here. Let's actually do this. Let's just take useAxios from right here. Let's just change this value because it's from the same file path. We're importing useAxios here. And then down here, we're just gonna do, let's see, we'll set this value to let, and we're just gonna call this API and we're gonna call the useAxios method. So let's just call it like that. We're gonna take this method and then all we need to do is change this to API, not Axios. So API, we're just calling the get method and that should be good. So let's check this out. Let's see if it still works. It looks like we have a few errors. Let's try to refresh this. And let's see, set auth tokens is not a function. Let's check this out. So inside of useAxios, we have set auth tokens. Let's go into the context API. And it looks like I never exported this. So we have set auth tokens. It is a function, it's a hook. And we just want to bring that in right here. So we'll do set auth tokens, add in the comma. All right, it's partially working. We're almost there. So useAxios set user is also not a function. Okay, so I'm just missing a few imports. Set user. All right, so let's take a look at this. And now it's looking good. So if we log out, we can log back in. Let's log out and try doing a hard refresh. Log back in, and there we go. So the beauty of this is now the fact that we're using a hook, the state is now being updated. So that's it for this video. In the next video, well, I don't know if it's gonna be the next one, but what I wanna do is actually do the same thing now with the fetch API, because that's actually the one I really like to use. It's more native to JavaScript, whereas Axios is more of a third-party package, or it is a third-party package. So I just wanna try to create like a wrapper around the fetch API to where we create our own Interceptor, kind of like what Axios already has built into it. So wait for that video. It should be coming soon. I already have the prototype ready. I just need to find some time to film it.